Rest in Peace ASIC, the 3rd of February, 2023. Martin North, John Adams, in the interest of people. Hello, John.
Hello, Martin. How are you going today?
Yeah, very good. And we're back in the studio once again to continue the ASIC saga.
Indeed. We have some important news to be able to reveal to the audience. So a week ago, we were fortunate enough not to just have one inquiry established. We had two inquiries established by Parliament. And now one of the committees has made their first bold move, and we're back to talk about that. But just so we can explain what happened last week, because there's a couple of people, Martin, I think who were slightly confused. So So in the Senate chamber last week, the Senate voted to establish an inquiry through a specific committee called the Senate Economic References Committee, and that's chaired by Senator Bragg, who's a Liberal from New South Wales, and that vote was 43-20. Now the 20 people that voted against that motion were from Labor, and the reason why they voted against it was because Labor has set up a different inquiry into ASIC with almost the identical terms of reference through a different committee. And that committee is called the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Corporations and Financial Services. So now we have, in the last week, we've had the creation of two web pages in terms of the two inquiries. So let's actually put up the inquiry chaired by the Coalition. And this is the Senate Economic References Committee, so we'll just put that on the screen. And Martin, let's also put the web page that is chaired by Labor. So Labor, Senator Deb O'Neill chairs the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Corporations and Financial Services. So let's put that on the screen so that people can fully comprehend how significant that last week was, because it is a monumental task to get one inquiry, but when you get two inquiries concurrently, that is a huge issue. And so one of the big questions that came out of after last Thursday, Martin, was, well, Labor effectively lost the vote in the chamber. Would they proceed with the inquiry at the joint committee, or would they just say, okay, well, we're just going to have one? Well, the news through multiple sources, but also some through written correspondence that one of our viewers sent to me in the last week, is Labor is not backing down. The inquiry at the joint committee will proceed, and we are going full steam ahead into 2023 with two inquiries into ASIC, and I don't think people at ASIC would be particularly pleased with that.
Now, there's 2 points, isn't it? The Labor one actually was they were able to table the inquiry without actually getting a vote, because it's a particular committee that has particular powers, so they could basically sum it up out of nowhere. Why hadn't they done it before? Interesting question. But the fact we got two, which means that both sides, both houses of, both sides of the aisle, as it were, both of them think that ASIC needs to be looked at. So everyone now thinks ASIC needs to be looked at.
So the key point on that one, Martin, is that so in the Senate last Thursday, the Coalition, the Greens, One Nation, Jackie Lambie's party, the UAP, and the independent Senator Pocock from ACT all voted for the inquiry, and then obviously Labor voted for established their own inquiry at the Joint Committee. So the reality is that there is universal consensus in the Australian Senate that there needs to be a close look in terms of ASIC's handling of reports of alleged misconduct and their enforcement record. So now the important question then becomes, Martin, is that if we have two inquiries, one chaired by the Coalition, one chaired by Labor, well, what should people do? Now, my strong position, and I think you share it in this philosophy, is that our philosophy, our commitment here at this channel is to serve the interests of the Australian people. So we are not going to take particular sides in terms of should we favour one inquiry over another inquiry. So I plan to, obviously because these inquiries were established after I published my report, my independent report from a few weeks ago about ASIC, I intend to fully participate with both inquiries to the extent that those inquiries want me to assist. So on Monday, I did tweet. I did put this out on social media. I went to Sydney and met Senator Matt Canavan from Queensland. Who's a Queensland senator. He was in Sydney on Monday. He's actually on the Senate Economic References Committee. So he's actually on the committee chaired by the coalition. And so we spent an hour talking about, in terms of my reports, in terms of the inquiry that's just been established, the importance of the inquiry, what I would hope the inquiry would achieve, and what's the best way to go about doing that. So we did that. And then yesterday, Martin, I actually wrote to the chair of the Joint Committee, chaired by Senator Deb O'Neill, and I wrote to Senator O'Neill and basically just said, well, congratulations on establishing an inquiry at the Joint Committee. You guys have a lot of important work to do. I stand ready to assist the Joint Committee with all its deliberations, and happy to assist the Joint Committee in whatever way that the Joint Committee thinks that I can add value. So so obviously I'm taking a very bipartisan approach, and I don't want anyone to think that I'm supporting one side or another, because at the end of the day, this is not about Labor or Liberal. This is about fixing ASIC and actually ensuring that financial crime in this country is actually properly addressed. So now, what I can say, Martin, is that today that the Senator Bragg's committee, which was now they have called yesterday. The dramatic news was that they have now officially called for submissions, and submissions are due on the 3rd of February 2023, and that's obviously part of our title of the show. So the Senate Economic References Committee has given the public 3 months to put all of their horror stories together about their interactions in terms of ASIC, and Senator Bragg actually put out a tweet, but he also put out a short video asking the public at large that if they've had a difficult experience with ASIC, that they should come forward and tell their story. So how about we play that short video from Senator Bragg?
We've opened submissions into the ASIC inquiry, which the Senate commissioned last week. Now, we want to hear from you. We want to know if you've had a bad experience with ASIC. We want to know if you have ideas about how ASIC can be improved. This is very important because we need to have a country where the corporate regulator works for all the people, that it works to enforce the law for consumers and for small businesses. So put your submission in to aph.gov.au or get in touch directly with my office if you want to have a chat.
Yeah, John, very interesting, because he's really actually wanting to engage. It's brilliant.
Yes. The thing is that, look, so Senator Bragg has had a long career in the private sector before coming to Parliament. So he's not necessarily seen as a political hack that's reliant on the political structure to give him a long-term career. So he's willing to push the envelope, and obviously for a politician to engage in the public and basically say, this agency is not going so well, we want to hear from the public at large, small business and consumers. I thought that was a nice short video. And since that video was released, Martin, his committee, the Senator Bragg's committee, has actually formally wrote to me today and actually invited me to put in a submission. So obviously I was going to put in a submission without an invitation. But obviously because I'm the catalyst in terms of all this activity, they have formally written to me and said, John, would you please put in a submission? Now, part of this show, Martin, is just obviously one to alert the public that with this Senate Economic References Committee, submissions are open now for submissions, and they've got 3 months to put those submissions together. But also to provide our perspective as to how best people should actually put their submissions together, because we've already had some questions about how that's going to look like. Now, in the case of me, Martin, so I will be submitting in January, so I'm going to let the process run for a bit. And so just so people are clear about what I'm doing is I'll be writing a very short submission in terms of a overview of the package, what I went through, and why I think that was a very interesting experience. But then obviously I'll be talking about the 2 ADM reports that we've covered here as well. And those ADM reports will be attachments to my submission. So basically there'll be a package of documents more than 100 pages and basically saying, well, I went through the process of bringing a report of alleged misconduct to the attention of ASIC. I found a number of deficiencies in the process that could be improved. And so I speak from personal experience. But separate to that, if you look at ASIC's own numbers, there is something seriously wrong in terms of these trends over 11 years that need to be examined by the committee. And so that'll be my submission, and I hope that, and I'll obviously be putting my name forward to be a witness when the public hearings start in earnest, probably around March of 2023.
Yeah, well, it's all now really going to take off, isn't it? And I suspect they're going to be pretty much flooded with submissions. I would hope so, because we know that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people who actually have been badly handled by ASIC. And therefore, if any of them take the opportunity to be able to actually share their story, as they should, there could be a big pile.
Indeed. Now, Martin, one of the important things for our audience to be appraised of is that the Senate approved the terms of reference, which was slightly different in terms of my terms of reference, and the terms of reference for both committees, which are almost identical. They are quite broad. So why don't we actually put these terms of reference on the screen? And particularly if you go to the Senate Economic References Committee, there is a link to actually seeing the terms of reference. So the first thing is that if someone wants to participate in the inquiry and put in a submission, make sure that you try to address the terms of reference that the Senate has actually endorsed and what the inquiry is actually looking at. But the one key aspect of these terms of reference is point C, and point C says, Martin, quote, whether ASIC is meeting the expectations of government, business and the community with respect to regulatory action and enforcement. So obviously the whole premise of this series of shows is to argue the point that ASIC is failing the public's expectations and the expectations of Parliament, because I've spoken with parliamentarians behind the scenes, but also some of these parliamentarians have been very public that ASIC has failed to live up to the expectations of Parliament. So I think for those people in particular who have gone to ASIC with a report of alleged misconduct and nothing has happened, and you think, well, why aren't they actually investigating? Why aren't they enforcing the law? Point C is where you really want to focus your in terms of your submission, and so point C is, I guess, the focus that this show and this platform will be focusing on over the next 3 months.
And I think I'd also say, John, it's also about setting an expectation in terms of what the community wants to see as well, right? Because it's partly failure, but also it should be a little bit about, well, seeing as they are the cop on the beat, we'd have some expectations that they would be doing this. I think that should be part of the story too.
Yes, indeed. Now, Martin, the thing is that so one our audience may ask the question, why is the title said "Rest in Peace, ASIC"? Because I mean, even though there are people out there who think that ASIC should be abolished and perhaps the new agency should be rebuilt in its place, that's not going to happen on the 3rd of February 2023. But the reason why I think that the 3rd of February is going to be a big milestone is that all of these horror stories that have been buried for a long time, they're now going to come out into the surface. And I know that there are numerous case studies, including the one that was featured on Four Corners by the Wolf of, in terms of the Wolf of Woy Woy. I mean, the Four Corners journalist has actually been in contact with me, and she has already indicated that the investors who have lost money, but also the whistleblower that was on national TV, and who said he never received a phone call or an email from ASIC, these people want to actually tell their story to Parliament. And that Wolf of Woy Woy story, that's not an isolated incident. There are many cases. And all you really, I think, need, Martin, is that just like in the Banking Royal Commission, if you have a number of examples that show a systemic pattern of failure to act, just like, for example, with the Banking Royal Commission, there was a systemic pattern of fee for no service, across multiple products. So this was standard industry practice, and the Royal Commission really exposed that practice is inappropriate, and a whole host of banks and insurance companies were forced to pay back billions of dollars in terms of money, and a number of people, senior executives, directors, chairmen, etc., they all lost their jobs. So even though people wanted more than that, I mean, that was better than nothing. We can come back to the Royal Commission there. So I think if we get significant and strong participation from the community, and if those submissions demonstrate what we have been led to believe through our private correspondence with our audience, that we're going to be able to show a systemic pattern of not enforcing the law. But even before enforcing the law, the willingness to investigate allegations of breaches of law, hopefully that will result in both the Parliament, the media, as well as the executive branch of the government, the Albanese government, to actually start taking action to changing how ASIC, not only how they operate, but I really strongly believe, and perhaps we've put in the cart before the horse, I do think that there has to be some strong personnel changes at the top of ASIC. And again, it's not necessarily the chairman and the commissioners, it is some of these day-to-day executive managers that have been at ASIC for about 20 years. So I think it is time for a change. But having been in the public service myself, Martin, I know that some of these people are not willing to just voluntarily resign their post. They'll have to be pushed somewhat. And I think the 3rd of February, it will be perhaps the ultimate death blow for some of these bureaucrats that have been there too long and haven't done the job that the public and the Parliament expects them to do.
I think, John, one other thought I had was that there was a lot of evidence in the earlier Financial Services Royal Commission of ASIC's failure. So they might want to dust off a few of those case studies because they're still very valid stories that really didn't go anywhere last time around. So, that's something else perhaps that the committee should be thinking about.
Yes, yeah. I mean, so correct. I think we're going to see a whole host of... We're going to see some historical cases post-GFC, and we're going to see some cases even, around 13, 14, 15, 16, pre-Royal Commission. And then I think we're going to see some new cases after the Royal Commission. And I think if we see both the contemporary stories and the historical stories, we're going to see a long line of a consistent pattern, and that pattern should be concerning to the committee. Now, Martin, today is actually a very interesting day in the history of ASIC because, funny enough, they actually have a very peculiar event called the ASIC Forum, and the ASIC Forum is a conference that the big end of town actually pay exorbitant sums of money, $2,500 a ticket, to come and actually interact with the senior people in terms of ASIC. And now this could issue. So next week, Martin, in Parliament is Senate estimates, and dare I say, I suspect that maybe one or two senators may ask a question about this forum issue because if ASIC ASIC has multiple roles and it has a broad mandate, but at the end of the day, ASIC's job is law enforcement. Yep. So it's a very unusual situation where the police are saying to the people that the police are basically regulating or overseeing, if you pay $2,500, well, you can come and have a cozy couple of days with us, and we can have a good chat about a whole host of issues. Because, Martin, unfortunately, with this forum, is that for $2,500 for 2 days to spend time with the senior leadership in terms of ASIC, is that mum and dad small-time retail investors who do want access to be able to address their grievances, well, a lot of them don't have $2,500 to spend on 2 days. So you have a complete... I mean, this is a really big concern for me, is about regulatory capture. I mean, these people are becoming friends and chummy with the big end of town, and they're charging these fees that only the big end of town can actually pay. And then in terms of the public at large who can't afford that, but maybe can't even take time off work, their ability to access the chairman and some of these commissioners are quite limited. So I think that's an issue that I think some senators may take issue with in terms of next year, but in terms of next week. But in terms of today, so Chairman Longo actually provided his keynote speech, and fun enough, didn't mention the events of last week, which I find quite unusual, because you would have thought that after such a dramatic turnaround in sentiment in Parliament, that the chairman would actually say something around, well, obviously ASIC is not meeting the expectations of parliamentarians in the Senate, and we need to actually strive better to actually ensure that Parliament has confidence in our ability to do the job that we're asked to do. So nothing like that from the chairman today. A very defensive speech, and there was a whole host of things that the chairman referred to before enforcement, and obviously that's a concern. So when ASIC talks about climate change and greenwashing and crypto and all of these things. They're important issues. But the number one task that ASIC has is enforcing the law. And that should be the first thing that comes out of ASIC's mouth. And all these other issues should be down the list. They shouldn't be at the top of the list. But on enforcement, Chairman Longo had a couple of interesting things to say. So let's put slide 1 on the screen, Martin. And here's what the Chairman said today. Quote, "We do not shy away from seeking significant penalties and undertaking important litigation. One of the challenges for a regulator is to strike the right balance. We don't take either of these responsibilities lightly. Given the complexity and volatility we face, there is no room for complacency. Complacency breeds failure. For our part, ASIC remains committed to being a strong and active litigator against misconduct. We need to be strategic. We make choices to direct our resources to ensure maximum public benefit." Now, Martin, a lot of that is motherhood statements. The facts don't bear out that sentiment. But obviously, again, the chairman said a whole host of positive things a few weeks ago in front of the House of Representatives. They've said some positive things here today. And obviously, the question, and this question will the answer will emerge by the 3rd of February once we get to see some of these submissions. Is the chairman's articulation of ASIC's performance, does that match how the public see it? And we know from previous reviews there is a huge gulf of perception between how ASIC thinks they do their job and how the public perceives ASIC to do their job. So I think these statements again is going to be a damning indictment when we see some of these specific case studies of huge criminality not being touched by ASIC.
Yes, and it's interesting, isn't it, John? Because of course they're not streaming the overall event, although his speech was actually put up in text form after he gave it.
Yes.
Which, from a public disclosure perspective, I've got a problem with, because you've got this all two-tier. If you pay, you might get a bit more exposure, but if you don't. But the other is, he clearly doesn't get it. He clearly doesn't understand how significant the events were over the last week or so, because if he did, he would have made some reference to it.
Precisely. But the other thing is, obviously, the minister, Stephen Jones, the assistant treasurer, spoke after Chairman Longo, and I don't think he either got the message either. So it is funny that between the House of Representatives and ASIC, there is one view, and then in the Senate, there's a very different view. So I think the Senate, as we go into next year, is going to bring the House and ASIC, they'll drag them along the process. So now, as we get into the submission, Martin, now I think in the context of these terms of reference and what we're focusing on, I think there are two types of submissions that our audience are likely to make. The first type of submission, Martin, is that someone or a group of people went to ASIC about a report of alleged misconduct, and then nothing happened, or the action that was taken by ASIC was that it wasn't enough, it was deficient. So if that's your circumstance, so these case studies have to be prepared very meticulously. So the types of things that people should be, in terms of putting together, is that, obviously what the Parliament wants to know is what is the nature of the case study. What is the nature of the case? What was the specific allegations that you made about, particularly in terms of particular people? Because I think that on that aspect, what Parliament wants to know was this a trivial complaint, or was this a serious complaint about serious matters? And so I think Parliament wants to then obviously try to understand in terms of what the gravity is. But then obviously, in terms of what capacity did you approach ASIC? Were you a whistleblower? Were you an investor? Were you an auditor or a liquidator, etc.? So obviously, telling the Parliament what your position was in going to ASIC, I think that's important. Having a chronology in terms of events, because the other thing is that a big issue with ASIC is the timeliness in terms of their ability to respond. So if you say, for example, I went to ASIC on, say, the 3rd of February 2018, and I didn't hear back until July 2018, and then they dragged it out for another 2 months, etc. Having those specific dates, and obviously if you have any corroborating evidence to support those dates, I think that is critical to establish a timeline of events so that the Parliament can, because again, what ASIC will attempt to do is try to deflect specific criticisms unless if you can nail them down. So if you can basically, say on these days, these specific events occurred and these are the documents that prove that these events occurred, well then it provides ASIC with less ability to say, well, we have an explanation for that case study, or we have an explanation in terms of that case study. So I think that's quite important. Obviously, trying to document what was ASIC's response, so whether it was no further action, or whether it was, they referred it to surveillance or the markets team, etc., or did it go to, in my case, for example, did it go to an official investigation? I think that's also important. And then obviously, being very clear, if you're submitting and saying that ASIC failed to do the job, well, what did you think ASIC failed to do? So being very specific. So it was either they didn't take the complaint seriously, or they didn't do anything with it, or they were too slow, or they conducted an investigation, but the investigation was flawed. I mean, whatever people's perceptions of the deficiency is, I think that needs to be clearly articulated so the Parliament can then actually understand, well, okay, what is the issue in terms of particular case study? And I know, Martin, that in certain instances, people already have, because there's been some serious legal cases. So some of these chronologies and chain of events have already been put together by lawyers. But if your story hasn't been put together by yourself or a lawyer, etc., again, we've asked the Parliament, like I asked a number of these parliamentarians for 3 or 4 months to give people the time to actually put the work in and actually carefully put their case study together. So again, there's no need to rush in terms of submissions. So people should try to spend the time over the next 3 months putting a carefully considered submission together, so that the Parliament can best understand what the issue was, and because the other aspect, Martin, is that one of the questions that Parliament will have to assess is, well, what volume of information was provided to ASIC when they complained, and is that volume of information sufficient for ASIC to be able to do their job? So because I had no confidence in ASIC, that's why I went with 608 pages, and I basically said, well, we're telling you as much as we can so that you can't say I didn't know. So but again, the question is, should I have gone to that effort, or could I have given them less, and they could have been able to start to piece the rest of the story together without me?
Yeah, and you have a remarkable capacity to put a lot of material together and build a very compelling case. But the question is, what should the threshold be? I don't think you should be forced to put 600 pages together just to get ASIC to take an interest. It doesn't seem fair or reasonable to me.
Precisely. Yeah. So that's going to be part of my story. Now, Martin, the other part of where some of our audience may wish to engage with inquiry is, if you were, not that if you made a complaint to ASIC, but if you were on the receiving end in terms of any action in terms of ASIC, so whether you were investigated by ASIC, whether ASIC took you to court, or whether ASIC approached your business or your investments, whatever the case may be, because there are some case studies where certain parties do want to say, for example, not that ASIC didn't do enough, that they basically dropped a nuclear bomb on the wrong target.
Yep.
So that hasn't been necessarily a key focus of our series of shows, because the statistics basically say they're doing less. But where they are taking aggressive action, the people on some of the receiving ends of some of that action have communicated with me, at least, that they believe that ASIC was targeting the wrong people. They weren't doing what ASIC alleged, and they basically their enforcement approach and their decision to go straight to court without a proper investigation. In one case in particular, I mean that was quite deficient. So in terms of those situations, Martin, so if people are making submission along those lines, obviously articulating what allegations did ASIC make against you or your business. What was the basis of those allegations? Again, a chronology of event. Why was ASIC's enforcement or investigation actions inappropriate and disproportionate? what was the outcome of the enforcement action that ASIC actually engaged in. So trying to just articulate those key points, I think, for that category of complaint or that category of submission to the inquiry, I think they're the key things to be able to do. And so I think if people do put in the time and the work, and whether you engage a lawyer or whether you engage various people, I mean, to be honest, a couple of people have approached me, Martin, and have actually asked for my assistance to assist the putting of a couple of submissions over the next few months. So I'll be helping a couple of people along those lines. So obviously, but obviously trying to tell a succinct but quite comprehensive story. I mean, that will be critical because these are the case studies that the senators will be examining closely before they have public hearings to understand, well, we obviously know there's a high rate of no further action. What was the nature of these no further action complaints? Were they serious? Were they trivial? And did ASIC make good judgments or bad judgments?
And I just wanted to pick up what you said there about maybe they're going after the wrong targets. You know, that I've heard a number of stories of small entities with relatively small issues where they were hit over the head with a 4x2.
Yes.
And, you know, actually, that's one way that ASIC could enhance their statistics by knocking over a few of these small guys, whilst not going after the big guys, the guys who are in the same room possibly as the moment, and they're paying their $2,500 to sit in front of the committee. It just makes me worry about the mix, you know, because maybe they're going after the wrong targets. And I think that's a really important point. This is why that second category of submissions is really, really critical.
That was a great point, Martin. Now the thing is that, so beyond our just articulation here, Martin, is that the committee itself has actually put up a web page that explains how to put a submission together and actually how to submit your submission to the inquiry. So why don't we actually put that up? Why don't we put that up on the screen for our audience to be able to see that? So again, this is for the Senate Economic References Committee, which is chaired by Senator Bragg and the coalition. And also now in the video we played earlier in the show, Martin, Senator Bragg basically said that if people have further questions, Senator Bragg has invited the public at large to contact his office, which is a very generous offer. So why don't we actually put Senator Bragg's details on the screen? Now, Senator Bragg may not like this because he may get thousands of emails, but he's actually asked for the public to communicate with him. So why don't we just put that on the screen? And again, we've put up his Sydney office number, his Parliament House number, his email address, and again, if you have specific questions that people can obviously address them to you or I, or people can go directly to the chairman of the inquiry and actually ask for further detail. And I'm sure the senator staff will be able to assist with any follow-up questions that they may have. So Martin, so we bring this episode to a close now. So now this is no longer theoretical. We are really now in the heart of the battle. Martin, look, in the last week, Martin, I had a whole host of people say congratulations on getting the inquiry, but getting the inquiry was only the beginning of it was the end of the beginning. So we still have the rest of the act to play out, and now is the really important part. So for all those people who say they have a story to tell, now is your chance in the next 3 months to tell that story. Because if you don't take this opportunity, you should never complain again about your grievances about ASIC or grievances about the financial system or the banks, etc. Because if you don't participate in democracy, you only have yourself to blame. So really now is the time. If you want to fix up Australia's financial police, if you want to change the leadership in terms of ASIC, if you want to put the financial crooks away in this country, now is the time that every person that has a dramatic and compelling story to tell Parliament, we've done our part. Now it's our audience and the public at large to engage. But also, I would say, Martin, is that not just people should actually put in their submissions, which are obviously important. People should tell their friends, their family, their people, their colleagues in business or the workplace about this inquiry and why it's important, so that more and more people are able to become aware of what's going on, and they'll be able to put in their submission. Just to give you one example, Martin, 2 days ago I had a phone call from one of our viewers who told me about a horrific story that she had with ASIC back in 2008. And when she told me the story, I said, did you ever put in a submission in the 2014 inquiry into ASIC? And she said, no, because I never knew the inquiry was on. So obviously ensuring that as many Australians know about this inquiry, and for those that have a relevant story, to engage in the inquiry, to put the submissions in. And again, if people need any form of help over the next few months, there are multiple people who are willing to assist, whether it's us or Parliament, etc. And people should utilise that help if they need that help.
Yeah, and it's worth saying, I think, John, finally, that there may be people who have not necessarily had a direct interaction with ASIC, but nevertheless have a strong point of view about what the financial police should be doing.
Yes.
I think it's also important that they actually also articulate that too, so that the review can actually understand what the sentiment is in the country about this, because this is a big deal, even if you haven't yet come across ASIC or actually tripped over in some other way. The question is, what's your expectation from the financial police? What should they be doing?
100%.
John, thank you very much. Really good conversation, really good point in the journey now. As you say, it's the end of the beginning, but we're now on the road, and it's all down now to the quality of those submissions, the quantity of those submissions, but at least momentum has started.
100%.
Martin North, John Adams, in the interest of the people. We'll see you next time.